The moment I said it, the room stopped breathing. I didn't mean to say it out loud, but pain has a way of turning thoughts into sound before you can stop them. It hurts too much. My voice cracked in the middle of the crowded diner, the words slipping out like something I couldn't hold anymore. I stood behind the counter of the Westbrook Cafe, my hands shaking as I gripped a stack of plates, trying to act like everything was normal, even though nothing in my life had felt normal for a long time. The shift had started like any other morning in Chicago: coffee orders, rushed customers, the hum of conversation blending into noise I had learned to ignore. But today was different. Every small comment from my manager felt heavier. Every careless laugh from the tables near me felt sharper. I kept telling myself to get through the next hour, then the next, but the pressure built until it finally broke. When I spoke, I didn't even realize I had stepped forward. My eyes were wet, my breath uneven, and for a second the entire cafe seemed to tilt toward silence. That was when I felt it, not saw it. A shift in the air, like the world had just recognized something dangerous had entered the room. He was there before I understood why everyone had gone still. Damon Blackwood. I had heard the name before, whispered in back hallways, mentioned by people who suddenly stopped talking when you walked closer. He stood near the entrance of the cafe like he had always belonged there. Dark coat, calm posture, eyes that didn't hurry for anything or anyone. He wasn't looking at the menu, or the people, or even the noise around him. He was looking at me, not with judgment, not with curiosity, but with a quiet attention that made me forget how to breathe properly. I lowered my gaze immediately, embarrassed by the mess I had become in front of strangers, but the silence only grew heavier. Someone near the counter dropped a receipt tray, the sound too loud in the stillness. I tried to move, to go back to work, to disappear into the routine again, but my legs wouldn't listen. Damon didn't speak at first. He just observed, as if every detail of the moment was being recorded somewhere I couldn't see. Then slowly, he stepped forward, and with that simple movement the entire atmosphere of the cafe changed. Conversations faded, chairs stopped scraping, even the espresso machine seemed to quiet. I didn't know it yet, but the world I had been struggling to survive in was about to shift in ways I could never reverse. I remember thinking that silence should not feel this heavy inside a small cafe on a weekday morning, yet it did. Every second stretched like it was waiting for permission to continue. My hands were still trembling as I forced myself to straighten the stack of plates, pretending I was invisible, pretending I had not just lost control of my own voice in front of strangers. I kept my eyes down, but I could feel him still there. Not moving away, not distracted, just present in a way that made the entire room feel smaller than it was. Damon Blackwood stood a few steps closer now, not invading, not rushing, but closing distance with the kind of patience that felt more powerful than speed. I told myself to breathe normally, to go back to work, to act like nothing had happened, yet my body refused to cooperate. The cafe manager cleared his throat somewhere behind the counter, trying to restart the normal rhythm of the room, but even his voice sounded uncertain. Then Damon finally spoke, and it was not loud, not dramatic, just calm enough to make everyone listen without realizing they were listening. He asked for coffee, black, no sugar. Simple words. Ordinary request. But somehow the entire cafe reacted like it was an instruction no one wanted to misunderstand. I moved automatically, pouring water into a glass I did not need to fill, just to give my hands something to do. My reflection in the stainless steel counter looked distant, like it belonged to someone else. I could still feel the echo of what I had said earlier, the moment of breaking, the moment I had lost control. When I turned back, Damon had not taken a seat like any other customer. He remained standing, his attention shifting slowly from the counter to me, as if waiting for something I had not yet realized I owed him. My manager approached him quickly, too quickly, with the kind of nervous energy that people only show when they recognize influence they cannot measure. He offered a polite greeting, overly careful, explaining specials that were not asked for, but Damon barely acknowledged him. His focus stayed on me, steady and unreadable. I lowered my head again, placing the coffee cup on the counter with more care than necessary, trying to retreat into my usual role of just another employee, just another face in a busy morning. But the air around him made that impossible. It felt like every movement I made was being noticed in a way I was not used to being noticed. When I finally slid the cup toward him, His hand paused before touching it. Not hesitation. Awareness. Like he had been studying more than just the coffee. My fingers brushed the edge of the cup by accident, and I quickly pulled away, embarrassed by how small that moment made me feel. Damon did not comment. Instead, he asked a simple question, my name. It should have been harmless, but the way he said it made it feel like something far more important than introduction. I hesitated before answering, unsure why giving my name felt like stepping closer to something I could not see the shape of yet. When I finally spoke it, he repeated it once, quietly, as if confirming it in his mind. And in that repetition, I felt something shift again, not in the room this time, but in the direction of my life itself. I did not understand at first why his voice made my thoughts slow down. It was not loud, not commanding in the way I expected from someone everyone seemed afraid to interrupt, yet it carried a kind of certainty that made the air feel heavier around it. He stood there holding the coffee I had just given him, but he did not drink it. Instead, he looked at me as if the cup was only an excuse to stay within the same space a little longer. My manager hovered nearby, clearly unsure whether to continue speaking or step away, and eventually chose silence. That silence was becoming a pattern around Damon Blackwood, like the world itself adjusted to avoid disturbing him. I tried to focus on my work, reaching for a cloth to wipe the counter even though it was already clean, just to have something to do with my hands. He finally took a slow sip of coffee, then set it down carefully, as if even that small action had weight. His eyes never left me. I told myself I was imagining it, that people like him did not fixate on people like me, that I was just another employee in a crowded city cafe, but the feeling would not leave. Then he asked me another question, this time about how long I had worked there. I answered without thinking, saying 2 years, my voice quieter than I intended. He nodded once, as if storing the information somewhere I could not access. A few customers had begun whispering again, the normal rhythm of the cafe slowly trying to return, but it felt fragile now, like glass held together by pressure. Damon did not seem interested in the noise around him at all. Instead, he asked something else, whether I always worked morning shifts. It felt like a simple question, but the way he asked it made it feel like observation rather than conversation. I said yes, mostly mornings, sometimes evenings when needed. He looked toward the entrance briefly, then back at me, as if confirming something only he could see forming. My manager finally stepped closer again, attempting to recover control of the situation, offering him a discount card, mentioning loyalty programs, trying to treat him like any other customer. Damon listened without reacting, then simply placed cash on the counter, more than enough for the coffee, and told him to keep the change. It was not the amount that made the moment strange, but the way he said it, like money was irrelevant to why he was here. When my manager walked away slightly confused, Damon turned his attention fully back to me again. There was a pause, longer than it should have been for a normal interaction, and in that pause I became aware of how still I had become. I asked if he needed anything else, already preparing to step away, but he said no immediately, then added my name again, slower this time, as if testing how it felt to say it. I felt a strange tension in my chest, not fear exactly, but awareness that something about this moment was not random. He finished his coffee without breaking eye contact with me, then stood in a controlled, unhurried motion. Before leaving, he placed a small folded napkin on the counter near my hand, not directly giving it to me, just leaving it there like a decision already made. Then he said he would return tomorrow at the same time. Not as a question, as a statement. And when he walked out of the cafe, the room slowly began to breathe again, but I did not. I did not sleep that night the way normal people sleep after a long shift. I lay in my small apartment staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of the morning inside the cafe, especially the moment he said he would return as if it was already decided and not something I had any power to respond to. The napkin he left on the counter was still in my mind, folded neatly in a way that felt intentional, even though I told myself it was probably nothing. By sunrise, I had convinced myself it would not matter, that he was just another wealthy customer passing through, someone used to attention and control, someone who would forget a waitress by the end of the day. But when I arrived at work the next morning, the cafe already felt different. My manager was there earlier than usual, standing near the entrance, checking the windows more than once, like he expected someone important to arrive at any moment. He barely looked at me when I walked in, which was unusual enough to make my stomach tighten. The usual sounds of morning preparation were there, the espresso machine heating, chairs being arranged, dishes clinking softly, but everything felt slightly off rhythm, like the space itself was waiting. I tried to focus on my tasks, tying my apron, wiping down the counter, restocking cups, but my attention kept drifting toward the front door without permission. Every time it opened, my body reacted before my mind could catch up. Then at exactly the same time as the previous day, the bell above the entrance rang again. Damon Blackwood walked in like the cafe had been expecting him all along. There was no hesitation in his movement, no pause to look around, no acknowledgement of the subtle shift in energy that followed his arrival. It was as if he already knew where everything was, including me. My manager straightened immediately, far too quickly, and moved toward him with a level of respect that did not match a normal customer interaction. Damon did not stop him, did not acknowledge him at first, his eyes scanning the room only once before landing directly on me again. I felt my breath catch without meaning to. He said nothing for a moment, just observed the same way he had the day before, like he was confirming I still existed in the same place. Then he asked for the same coffee again, black, no sugar. I moved automatically, repeating the same steps as yesterday, but everything felt more controlled now, like repetition had already begun forming a pattern I did not consent to. When I placed the cup in front of him, his fingers brushed it slightly before he fully grasped it, and he spoke my name again. But this time it carried something different, not question, not confirmation, something closer to recognition. My manager tried once more to insert himself into the interaction, asking if everything was satisfactory, offering additional options, but Damon did not respond to him at all. Instead, he placed another folded napkin on the counter, in almost the same position as the previous day, and for a moment I felt my chest tighten because I realized it was not random anymore. He looked at me and said he noticed I looked more tired today than yesterday. It was not said as concern in the way people usually express it. It was stated like information he had already recorded and was simply updating. And before I could respond, he said he would adjust the time of his visits if necessary, as if my exhaustion was something he had authority over. Then he simply waited, as if my reaction was part of something he was still in the process of understanding. By the third morning, I no longer told myself it was a coincidence. I stood behind the counter of the cafe with the same routine motions, but something inside me had already started anticipating the exact moment the door would open. It was not fear in the way I expected fear to feel. It was something quieter, more persistent, like awareness that refused to leave even when I tried to ignore it. My manager had begun arriving earlier than usual, and the staff had stopped joking during setup. No one said his name directly, but everyone knew who they were waiting for. When the bell above the entrance finally rang, I did not look up immediately. I could feel him before I saw him, the same way you feel a change in pressure before a storm arrives. Damon Blackwood stepped inside at the exact same time again, as if the day itself had been arranged around his schedule. This time, he did not approach the counter right away. He paused just inside the entrance, scanning the room slowly, and for the first time I noticed that other customers were adjusting their behavior without being told. Conversations lowered, movements slowed. Even the barista behind me became unusually precise with every action. My manager moved toward Damon again, but this time he stopped halfway, as if reconsidering whether he should interrupt whatever invisible process was happening. Damon finally walked forward, but instead of coming directly to me, he stopped at a table near the window, sat down without hesitation, and placed his attention on the space between us rather than on the menu. I brought his coffee out, trying to keep my expression neutral, but I could feel my pulse in my hands as I set the cup down. He thanked me again, same calm voice, same controlled tone, but then he did something different. He asked if I had eaten anything that morning. The question caught me off guard because it did not fit the pattern of everything else. I hesitated before answering honestly that I had not had time. He nodded once, like he had confirmed another detail he was tracking internally. Without looking away from me, he reached into his coat and placed another folded napkin on the table, this one closer to my side than before. My manager watched from behind the counter, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to interfere. Damon did not touch his coffee right away. Instead, he asked me a question about my schedule, about whether I always worked every morning shift, and when I confirmed it, There was a brief silence that felt heavier than conversation. He then stated that this was acceptable, but that it might change soon. I did not understand what he meant, and I did not ask, because something in his expression suggested the answer would not be optional. When I turned to leave, he spoke my name again, but this time he added something I had not expected, that he remembered everything he observed. The words should have sounded ordinary, but the way he said them made my skin feel cold in a way I could not explain. And when I looked back at him, I realized he was no longer just visiting the cafe. He was watching a pattern I had not yet seen forming around my life. The days after that began to blur together in a way I could no longer separate into normal shifts or normal mornings. I would wake up, get dressed, walk to the cafe, and feel the same strange expectation building inside me before I even reached the door. It was not excitement, and it was not fear in the usual sense. It was something more like anticipation mixed with uncertainty, as if I were waiting for a moment I did not fully agree to but could no longer avoid. Damon Blackwood had become a pattern in my life without ever asking for permission to exist there. He still arrived at the same time, still ordered the same coffee, still spoke my name with the same controlled calm that made everything around him feel slightly quieter. But something had changed now, something I could not ignore anymore. It was no longer just observation. It felt like recognition turning into intention. On the fifth morning, I noticed my manager speaking to someone on the phone before Damon arrived. He sounded nervous, overly careful with his words, repeating phrases about scheduling and private arrangements that did not make sense in the context of a small cafe. When Damon entered, he did not immediately look for a seat or for me. Instead, he spoke briefly with my manager near the counter, their conversation low enough that I could not hear the details, but clear enough in tone to understand it was not casual. My manager kept glancing at me during the exchange, his expression tight, uncertain, as if he had been given instructions he was not comfortable delivering. When Damon finally turned toward me, there was something different in his eyes. It was not intensity alone anymore. It was decision. He ordered his coffee as usual, but when I placed it in front of him, he did not immediately let me leave. Instead, he asked if I would be willing to step outside for a moment after my shift. The question was simple, but the weight behind it was not. I hesitated, unsure how to respond, because nothing about my life had prepared me for a man like him asking something like that in a tone that assumed I would agree. My manager cleared his throat behind me and quickly said it would be fine, almost too quickly, as if the answer had already been decided before I spoke. Damon did not look at him. He was still watching me, waiting, not pressing, but not retreating either. I finally nodded without fully understanding why I was agreeing. That small motion seemed to satisfy him in a way I did not expect. He released the moment immediately, taking his coffee and stepping away from the counter, but the air did not return to normal afterward. It stayed changed, as if something irreversible had just been acknowledged without being fully spoken. The rest of my shift passed in a strange state of distraction. I made mistakes I normally would not make, forgot small orders, repeated myself once without realizing it, and every time I looked toward the entrance, I half expected him to still be there, even though he had already left. My manager avoided talking to me directly for most of the afternoon, which made the silence between us even more noticeable. When my shift finally ended, I stood outside the cafe for several minutes before leaving, unsure why I felt like stepping away would lead me into something I could not reverse. The street was quieter than usual, the late afternoon light stretching long across the pavement, and for the first time since this had started, I was not sure whether I was walking away from something or toward it. I did not go straight home after my shift ended. I stood across the street from the cafe for several minutes, pretending to check my phone while actually watching the front door as if it might explain what I was feeling if I gave it enough time. The evening air in Chicago was cooler than I expected, and the sidewalks were filling with people heading home or toward restaurants, but none of it felt like it belonged to me in that moment. Every instinct I had was telling me to leave, to return to my small apartment, to reset the day like nothing unusual had happened. But something inside me stayed still, anchored to the idea that once I moved forward, I would not be able to undo whatever was about to happen. Then I saw him. Damon Blackwood was already there, not inside the cafe this time, but outside, standing near the edge of the sidewalk as if he had been waiting longer than I had realized. He was not looking at his phone, not distracted, just present in a way that made it clear he had chosen that exact location for a reason. When he saw me, he did not wave or call out. He simply shifted his attention fully in my direction, and that alone felt like an invitation I had already agreed to without knowing it. I crossed the street slowly, aware of every step, every sound, every breath. Up close, he looked the same as before, calm, controlled, unreadable in a way that no amount of familiarity seemed to soften. He asked if I had eaten, the same way he had asked before, and I told him I had not, because honesty seemed easier than pretending. He nodded once, as if that confirmed something important. Then he motioned slightly toward a quiet corner of the street where there were fewer people passing. I hesitated, but followed. We stopped near a bench under a streetlight, far enough from the cafe that it felt like a different space entirely. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city moved around us, cars passing, distant conversations blending into background noise, but between us it felt contained, almost isolated. Then he said something I did not expect. He told me that I should not ignore exhaustion, that patterns of overwork tend to lead to mistakes that are preventable. The way he said it was not judgmental. It was precise, like he had been observing something for a long time and had finally decided to comment on it directly. I did not know how to respond, because it felt strange to hear concern framed with such control. I asked him why he was paying attention to my schedule, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to sound defensive. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked past me toward the cafe, then back again, as if measuring something I could not see. When he finally spoke, he said that people around me were not reliable, that environments I considered normal were not as stable as they appeared. The words should have sounded vague or even dramatic, but in his voice they sounded like conclusions rather than opinions. I told him I did not understand what he meant. He did not explain further. Instead, he asked me if I would be willing to change my working hours, not as a suggestion, but as something that had already been considered from multiple angles. I felt a strange pressure in my chest because I realized he was not asking me to decide in isolation. He was waiting as if other factors were already in motion. And for the first time since this began, I understood that whatever this was, it was no longer just about coffee or timing or coincidence. It was becoming something structured, something deliberate, something I had not yet seen the full shape of. The next time I saw him, I realized the world had already started adjusting around his presence in ways I could not fully explain. It was not dramatic or loud, nothing that would immediately raise alarm, but small details had shifted, like pieces of a puzzle being quietly moved while I was not looking. My shift schedule at the cafe had been changed without my request, and when I asked my manager about it, he only said it was a management decision and that I should be grateful for the adjustment. I did not understand what that meant at first, but something in his tone made it clear that the decision had not come from him alone. When I stepped outside after work that day, Damon Blackwood was already there again, standing in the same general area as before, as if the space itself had become assigned to him. He did not approach immediately this time. Instead, he watched me exit, waiting until I noticed him before taking a single step forward. I remember feeling my heart slow in a way that did not make sense, like my body was reacting before my thoughts could catch up. He asked if the new schedule was acceptable. The question was simple, but it carried the same weight I had begun to associate with everything he said. I told him I did not understand how he knew about the schedule change. He did not answer directly. Instead, he said that adjustments were necessary for consistency, and that unpredictability created unnecessary strain. The way he spoke made it sound less like a suggestion and more like something already concluded elsewhere. I asked him what he meant by consistency, and there was a pause before he responded, long enough for me to realize he was choosing his words carefully. He said consistency meant reducing variables that could negatively affect outcomes. I did not know how to respond to that, because I was no longer sure if we were talking about my work or something I could not see yet. We walked slowly along the sidewalk without a clear destination. The city was active around us, people moving in and out of restaurants, cars passing, conversations blending into distance, but our space felt separate from all of it. I noticed that no one interrupted us, no one approached him, no one even seemed to register his presence the way I did. It was as if the world had decided not to interfere. I asked him why he was involved in any of this at all, why my schedule, my routines, my daily life mattered in any way to him. He stopped walking at that point and turned slightly toward me. For a moment, he did not answer, and I could see something shift in his expression, not emotion exactly, but calculation turning into something more defined. He said that patterns always mattered, and that people often underestimated how much their environment influenced their safety and stability. I told him my life was not unstable, that I was fine, that I did not need anyone adjusting things I had not asked to be adjusted. He listened without interrupting, and that silence felt heavier than any disagreement. When I finished speaking, he simply said that I had not yet seen enough to understand the difference between normal and stable. Then he continued walking, as if the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. I stood there for a moment before following, unsure why I was still moving in the same direction as someone who had already begun redefining the shape of my life without ever asking permission. That night felt different before anything even happened. I remember standing outside the cafe after closing, holding my bag tighter than usual, noticing how the streetlights flickered in a rhythm that made everything feel slightly unreal. Damon Blackwood was already there, but this time he was not standing where he usually did. He was leaning against a black car parked near the curb, positioned in a way that made it clear he had not just arrived, but had been waiting for a while. When he saw me, he did not immediately speak. Instead, he opened the passenger door as if the moment had already been arranged long before I reached it. I stopped walking, unsure why the sight of him felt heavier than before. Something in me understood that the pattern I had been noticing was reaching its final shape. He said my name once, and it was enough to make me move forward without fully deciding to. I told myself I could still walk away, that nothing forced me to continue, yet my steps carried me closer anyway. When I reached the car, he asked if I was tired, the same calm tone, the same controlled presence, but now it felt like a question that already knew its answer. I nodded without speaking. He told me to sit, not as a command, but as something so certain it left no space for refusal. I sat inside, feeling the quiet press in around me as he closed the door and walked around to the driver's side. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city outside continued as if nothing had changed, but inside that car, everything felt separated from the rest of the world. He started the engine but did not drive immediately. Instead, he turned slightly toward me and said that what I had experienced so far was only the surface of a structure I had not yet seen. I asked him what structure he was talking about, trying to keep my voice steady, but it came out softer than I intended. He looked forward at the road when he answered, saying that most people live inside systems they never question, believing randomness explains what is actually designed. I did not understand what he meant, and I told him that directly. He finally began driving, slow and controlled, merging into traffic as if every movement had already been calculated. He said that my schedule changes, my adjusted shifts, even the timing of his visits were not coincidences, but corrections. I felt a tightening in my chest as I listened, because the idea that my life had been adjusted without my awareness was difficult to process. I told him I did not want my life adjusted by anyone, and there was silence before he responded. He said it was not about control, but about stability, and that instability always created outcomes that could not be reversed once they began. The way he said it made it feel less like opinion and more like observation. We drove for several minutes without direction I could recognize, passing parts of the city I did not usually see. Eventually, he slowed near a quiet intersection and stopped the car. He looked at me then, fully, without distraction, and said that I had already been part of his attention longer than I realized, and that what was happening now was only the moment I became aware of it. I did not know how to respond to that, because something in his voice made it clear this was not a beginning being offered, but a reality already in motion. And as I sat there, I understood that the life I thought I was living had already started changing long before I ever noticed him walk into the cafe.